Here's the thing about burnout in today's organizational culture. It's more than just a buzzword. It's a leadership crisis hiding in plain sight, according to recent 2025 to 2026 data released from Workplace Leadership Studies. It reveals leaders are becoming increasingly worried about the workload they're asking their employees and workforce to consume. And furthermore, when we talk about neurodivergent individuals versus neurotypical burnout comparisons, discovers that 56% of U.S. executives report experiencing burnout. And the numbers, they tell a completely and deeper story if you look at them even more closer. 56% of neurodivergent individuals experience burnout, compared to just 36 to 38% of their neurotypical peers, which reveals a gap that most workplaces fail to address. In this powerful episode and discussion, I had a chance to sit down with my friend Ron Sosa. He's a neuro-inclusive leadership coach, international speaker, author, and executive director of the Veterinary Conference, and through his work with Syn-APT Inclusive Leadership, Ron is helping both organizations and individuals move beyond surface level solutions and tackle the real and often invisible challenges of modern work: overthinking, overadapting, masking, and chronic burnout. This conversation challenges and makes you think about the assumption that inclusion is simply about accommodations. Instead, Ron introduces a transformative idea of what if we redesigned the way that we look at work itself. We explore what that looks like in practice and what proactive communication, things such as sharing agendas and expectations in advance, can do for unlocking potential and performance, and how flexible environments can empower people to give their best efforts and do their best work, not just more work. We also explore the importance of feedback channels which align with different lines of thinking and communication styles. We also look at how sensory supports can shift workplaces from tolerable to truly sustainable. As Ron puts it, we often see asking for accommodations as a negative, rather than the employee empowering themselves to advocate for their own sense of productivity and production that all organizations can be proud of. His experience is backed by emerging research and lived experience. This episode reframes burnout not as a personal failure, but rather a systems design issue. If leaders want better outcomes, they need to produce better environments. And Sosa joined me this week to tell me more. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. take a moment to welcome you to the program, and I'm super excited to learn how you help organizations embrace neurodiversity, inclusion, diversity, and equity. Great to see you on this Monday, and thanks so very much for being here, my friend. Well, it's Tuesday, my mistake. Happy Tuesday to you, my friend.
Happy Tuesday. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, my friend. So I wanted to start our conversation, Ronald, by asking you a bit about your definition of what you think diversity, equity, and inclusion really means in today's modern society and workforce. My friend, what do you think DE&I means in the modern workforce today, my friend?
I feel like for me, it means that we are a human being talking to another individual human being. And that comes with a variety of differences in how our brains function and where we come from and cultural and all of the pieces. All of that aside, I think that it's just a human being across from another human being and allowing and accepting and being curious about any differences that might be between us.
No, absolutely. No, I asked you about inclusion to start off, but I also wanted to ask you about neurodiversity and what do you think people need to know about the modern definition of what it truly means to be neurodiverse and how it can act as a competitive advantage? What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Yeah, I mean, neurodiversity is just an umbrella term, right? It's just the variety of the way the brains process in this world, and the competitive advantages. I mean, just in the sense of how society is set up, I think there's a lot of competitive advantages. I think that there are, kind of the cliche ones of product of creativity and innovation if we allow it to happen. And I think that's the biggest part is like I'll see someone want to have neurodiversity as part of their workforce, but then it doesn't actually come to fruition. But if we allow it, I think the creativity and innovation that can be had by thinking outside the box and understanding someone's differences is really powerful and a competitive edge for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Ronald, I know that you're a neuro-inclusive leadership coach. You're an international speaker, author, and the executive director of the Uncharted Veterinary Conference, my friend. Now, that's a unique combination of roles, my friend, and I'm wondering if you can walk me through your journey and how the path led to what you're doing today and what makes you so fabulous, my friend.
Yeah, it's interesting. I started my career. I went to college the first time around for computer science, and I dropped out my junior year thinking I'm never going to get anything more than a customer service job. All of that negative self-talk. And so I answered a job off of Craigslist, to be honest, back in the early 2000s. And I wound up at a veterinary hospital as a client service representative. And it blossomed from there. My love for medicine and people kind of took hold. And so I moved my way up and around veterinary medicine for the last 24 years. And I think what happens is when you get good at something, you get a promotion, right? So I was really good at process. And then I wound up in inventory management. And then I wound up, hey, can you help us with our practice management system? And then all of a sudden I was managing a practice itself. And I got the very fortunate opportunity to buy into a practice and earn my way into practice ownership, even at a small minority share with a veterinarian friend of mine. After we sold that, I worked for the corporation that purchased the hospitals. And then now I'm working as the executive director for the Uncharted Veterinary Conference. And that's really allowed me to give back in the learning and development part. And even in my own professional development, I found coaching. And so I went from neurodiversity advocacy on the side and coaching and married them to make a bigger impact on the world for neurodivergent professionals. who are really struggling in the workplace through my own journey of getting an ADHD diagnosis in my mid 20s, and then later in my mid to late 30s, getting my autism diagnosis. So it allows me to make an impact on kind of the support that I never had.
Absolutely. And Ronald, just because I'm personally curious, I'm going to go off script for just a second. People with disabilities, and I am one as well. I have cerebral palsy. Oftentimes people like you and I, Ronald, are asked to sort of, go into the well of resilience all of the time. And, sometimes I think people with disabilities are asked to be over resilient without the promise of prosperity. And I
Yeah.
call it a lack of, the oxygen of opportunity. And sometimes, people with disabilities uh, aren't given the oxygen of opportunity. And I'm curious to your thoughts on how people with disabilities are asked to be over resilient without the promise of prosperity. And how do you think we can have a transformational shift in that regard in the executive space, so that the resilience that people with disabilities are often asked to sort of exhibit can lead to prosperity at the end of the rainbow? What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Yeah, I think that's real. I've always said, and sometimes quite controversially, that neurodivergent individuals, and I can speak for my community, but I think that probably extends out to other disabled communities, is that we do have a wider band of resilience because of the amount of adversity that we have gone through, right? Somebody who has not gone through that much adversity in their life and has all of a sudden faced that much, I think that resilience band would snap. So I do think we have a wider resilience band due to the fact that we've had adversity from day one. Um, and so I think that there are two components of this. We've got like very visible disability and invisible disability. So for me, I can speak on the fact that I've got a very invisible disability in the sense of like it can be hidden away, or I can quote unquote mask. So turn my behaviors in a way that people won't notice that I am quote unquote different. And I do that by hiding stims, like instead of hand flapping or verbally stimming, which is a repetitive action to soothe my nervous system. I have often like chewed the insides of my cheeks so that it's not visible, it's not distracting to anyone, and nobody notices. So there's ways that different communities will call it masking or camouflaging or code switching, just to fit in, to seem normal, just to be able to get those opportunities. That may or may not be handed to us otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ronald, I know you're someone who talks about the hidden cost of over-adapting, as we just talked about, especially for high achievers who may seem fine, but outside are burning out quietly, my friend. What do you think people misunderstand the most about that kind of burnout, and why it's so hard to spot, my friend? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think that people will often see somebody who is a high achiever and think that, wow, they can climb great heights and do great things. And frankly, I think that high achieving is often like a symptom of somebody who's probably carrying quite an invisible load, or of things like, for instance, I can speak about myself in the neurodivergent community and the clients that I've worked with. Is There's stats out there that say that by the time a neurodivergent child is 10, they have received 20,000 more negative comments or corrective comments in their life by the age of 10 than a non-neurodivergent person. Okay? And so if we extend that back and beyond, into beyond 10 years old and into the workplace, we receive a lot more negative feedback, a lot more corrective feedback. And so part of that masking is to hide those components that gave us the negative feedback. And then what happens is we look as if we're high achieving, and all we are doing is quietly burning out inside. We are going against our natural wiring. We are giving of ourselves so much to other people. Like when I speak for myself in veterinary medicine, I gave to my team, I gave to my clients, I gave to my colleagues, my bosses, I gave to the patients. So much of them I gave of me and never to myself. And so while my career path looks really good on paper, no one sees how I am exhausted at the end of the day from having to stop translating and masking and come home and unwind, right? No one gets to see how many times I have burned out just doing the absolute uh, job that everyone else is doing in their career. So yeah, I say we're quietly holding on to too much. If you consider the neurodivergent brain like a Mac and the non-neurodivergent brain like a PC, I constantly have to translate what other people are thinking into the way I think, and then interpret that in the way I think, and then retranslate that into the way they think. And so that's a lot of cognitive processing, a lot of mental energy that I am doing for every single task, every single communication, every single thing that I do with other people in environments. So now I'm not just working a full-time job, I'm working a second full-time job, just translating that back and forth. And so that's the hidden cost of looking like a high achiever, is I'm burning myself out quietly and no one's noticing because I'm able to produce a wide variety of work without question.
Yeah, absolutely. And building on that, I know you talk to people about the power or the phrase of self-trust. After masking for people who have spent years performing and adapting and trying to fit it in, as you were just discussing. So I'm curious to ask you, how do you think people can uh, begin to rebuild their confidence and reconnecting with who they actually are, and how big of a component do you think self-reflection is in that process as well? What are your thoughts then?
Yeah, I think that's really the power for me that I found in coaching is I really lead people back to who they are and unmask by like, what are your values as a human being, right? So what is it that we value as in the core of ourselves? And that oftentimes is really hard because we've never done that work before. Maybe we've done that in our workplace and we have these values on the wall. But how many of us have done it for ourselves? And if you have, you need to be challenged a little bit because that mask is a little bit insidious to our identity. It erodes our identity back. And so sometimes we think what our values are actually based out of fear or seeking validation. So things that keep me gaining praise, I think is my value, or the things that keep me from fear of failure might be a value. And those are not the values of our authentic self. Those are the values that keep that mask on even tighter. And so having someone to challenge you like a coach to be able to sort that out and process it verbally with somebody and say, oh, you know what, that value is not actually mine. And then we work through a lot of inner critic or negative self-talk because we received that enormous amount of negative feedback in our lifetime. Our brains have absorbed those sayings over and over again, and confirmation bias is a shortcut our brains use and say, see, you're not living up to your potential, just like your third grade teacher said. See, you're really lazy, just like your mom and dad used to say when you were a kid. And so it's kind of almost using confirmation bias against ourselves and seeing all of the negative feedback and telling us that negative feedback to ourselves. So parsing apart our negative thoughts from our own identity is really important in the sense of we can have negative thoughts, but that's not who we are. So instead of saying, I am broken, I am lazy, I am not living up to my potential, you can say, I have thoughts that are telling me I am lazy, right? And that difference is powerful when you go from saying, I am lazy to I'm having a thought that's telling me that I'm lazy, right? One is
Yeah,
a little bit more empowering to understand that I'm not an actual lazy person. I'm just having a thought.
yeah, absolutely. And Ronald, I want to ask you about the cycle of burnout because I know you work with neurodivergent individuals to break the cycle of burnout and build
Yeah.
sustainable systems for both energy communication and decision making. So I want to ask you about that, but I also want to ask you about the cycle uh, of burnout from this perspective. You know, neurodivergent individuals with disabilities often feel it. I've felt this myself, but they have to overwork or outperform others just to get noticed. So under that sort of a cycle and knowing your work with helping people, get out of the burnout cycles, how do you think neurodivergent individuals can break the cycle of burnout? And how do you think employers can make them feel more visible in today's workforce? What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Yeah, I think that's really, I love this question. I think it's really about finding who you are, right? When we think about all the shoulds, like I should be able to do X, Y, Z, when we think about those should thoughts, it really does kind of disable us in a different way internally. And so if we can come back to who we are, right, and what our values are and remove the stigma of our own internal shame, I think that really does free up capacity for us to have better executive functioning. We're still going to have times of dysfunction, but it allows us to give us grace and self understanding and self trust when we can have a dysregulated moment or an executive dysfunction moment and decrease that frequency and intensity by coming back to who we are all of the time and remembering who we are every time. And if we can do that, it really does break some of that burnout because we're no longer performing for other people. We're acting in accordance to who it is we are and who it is we want to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ronald, I'm curious to get your thoughts on these findings from Forbes that reported this year that 80% of workers are unprepared for the 2026 job market, creating what they're calling, a signal clarity crisis, my friend, and not knowing what they're competent what they're confident about, and they're saying that more and more people, regardless if you're neurodiverse or you have a disability, lack confidence in today's job market, and they're calling it, the major confidence gap, my friend. So, what comes to mind when you hear those statistics, and how do you think we can get people with neurodiversity or individuals or just people in general more confident to attack the modern job market? What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Yeah, that's interesting. When I think about confidence, I really go back to how much negative internal world we have, right? So social media, as we know, is has like that comparison is already putting more negative thoughts, right? Like we're seeing people have these amazing vacations and we're seeing people, oh, I can 10x your business and you can make $1 million. And meanwhile, we've got the average person who struggles to make an income or that was it that everything is getting more expensive around us and inflation is out of control. So I think that when we start to see that, we compare, and that comparison is what really invokes that inner critic to tell us the negative thoughts that we have. And so see that confirmation bias is, see, yep, I'm not living up to my potential. I should be doing more. And those thoughts of I should be are really not who we are, not who we want to be. And I think that's the confidence problem that we are having, is the comparison with social media and then really invoking that internal negative self-talk.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to also dive into the idea of or the concept of performance theater, where neurodivergent professionals expend a huge amount of masking just to appear neurotypical, my friend. And I know you work with clients to really go through the real cost of that and what needs to change so people can show up as their authentic selves, my friend. So how do we get rid of masking and show up authentically for neurodivergent? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it was something I didn't even discover until I got my own diagnoses. And my husband, before we got married, we've been together now 20 years this month. And early on, when we got together, he would say, "Why are you such a different person at work than you are with, when you go out with friends versus who you are with me?" He's like, "I don't really understand it." He goes, "I'm the same person whether or not I'm with friends or at work or wherever." And he saw different personality traits come out at me depending on who I surrounded myself with. And at the time, I just kind of thought, it was like, doesn't everybody like have a professional persona and then have a friend persona and then have like a relationship persona? So I didn't see anything wrong with that. And what I realized in doing this work several years ago was like that's part of the mask, right? We're performing what we think the society we think we should look like based on what society thinks we should be. And so, like, I thought when I hung out with my friends, I had to be energetic and fun and exciting. And when I was at work, I thought I needed to be like cool, calm, collected, have all the answers. And then when I was with my husband, I thought like I need to be a certain way, right? I need to be romantic. I need to be this different person. And what I realized, I wasn't being me anywhere, and I wasn't being authentically myself. And then that wears at you, that eats away at your identity. I worked with one client. I was so shocked when she said something to me. I don't remember exactly how we got into the conversation about like what our favorite things were, but she's like, "I don't even know what my favorite color is. I know that I tell people it's pink because that's what they expect from me as a female." She says, "But I don't really know what my favorite color is. I never really thought of it too hard." And I think that's that right there is case in point of how erosive of our identity is when we are masking and putting on a performance just for society, for other people, rather than for who we are and what we want for ourselves.
Yeah, and going back to burnout for a second, you almost say that it's rarely about having a lack of time, and it's more about a disconnection and self-recognition problem and a need to build systems. So I'm wondering if we can rethink the definition of burnout through your eyes and how that really looks in today's modern society. What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Yeah, I think burnout, if I can make a parallel to like your car's engine, right? Like burnout is when the engine has been revving up for so long that now it overheats, right? And no matter how much you let that car sit there and turn it off and quote unquote rest, something in the engine probably doesn't work as well as the way it used to, right? So rest is not enough. We've got to replace some of the parts. And I think the same thing about burnout from a neurodivergent perspective is when I've been cognitively working for so hard for so long and I can't process anymore, we lose skill and we lose some knowledge, right? That we need to gain back. So when we have enough rest, when we have enough time to recoup and decrease that cognitive load that is upon us, and we can put ourselves in an environment where we can actually work at a lower capacity and regain that knowledge and skill, then we can overcome the burnout. But if we just say, "I'm going to take a 2 week vacation and come back the way I was," it's not going to work, right? If you just blow out the engine in your car and say, "Oh, I'll just let it sit in the garage for 2 weeks and then turn it back on," it's not going to work.
You know, Ronald, I'm a big believer in self-reflection and taking stock and pause and when you achieve or accomplish something. And, you know, I having a disability, you know, I suffer sometimes from the always on culture. And I know
Yeah.
you work with clients who come to you exhausted and feeling disconnected. So I'm wondering your thoughts on, you know, when you work with someone that says, "I'm really exhausted, but I love what I do, but I feel disconnected to myself." And I'm curious to ask you about the power of self-reflection, how that goes into reconnecting with your authentic self, and how you can go from feeling exhausted and disconnected thriving and valuing yourself first and really knowing what your own individual value proposition is. What do you think your thoughts are there?
Yeah, I think the always on culture is interesting. I think everything that we do is most likely some sort of pattern. So if we're always on, what does that always on, like what is that protecting you from? What does that give, what kind of reward is that giving you? Right. And if we tie our self-worth into being always on, and that means we have no self-worth when we relax. So like I worked with one client, I'll never forget it. He told me that he thought even taking a break was equivalent to death. And that was such a revelation to him when he was able to process it out loud and say, wow, I can't take a break because I actually equivalate in his brain, equated that with death and his mortality. And it's not that he thought he was going to die, but that's kind of that same level of comparison that he thought putting taking a break was. So I'm not sure if I answered that question exactly, but I think we've got to ask ourselves, what does that behavior protect us from, and what rewards are we getting out of that behavior, and really dig deep into that self-reflection that you said. And if we can understand what those rewards are that we're getting and what the protection mechanism is, like what are we actually protecting ourselves from, then logically sometimes we can break some of those patterns of always being on by realizing what we're doing by being on.
Yeah, absolutely. No. Ronald, I also wanted to ask you about your own sort of muscle of resilience because, as you mentioned before, you were diagnosed with ADHD in your early 20s, and uh, in your 30s, you were given a primary diagnosis of autism. I'm curious to ask you about what you learned about yourself through that process, the emotional journey you went through, and how you uh, took that information and painted your own portrait of success, my friend. What are your thoughts then?
Yeah, my own journey getting diagnosis was it was a lot. There was a lot of not just getting the diagnosis, but then, unmasking part. I think that was a whole journey together. And there's a lot of grief there on kind of you create these expectations when you're a kid, right? Like that your parents ask you, everyone around you asks you, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And there's this idea in your head that you're going to be some amazing career. You're going to have the white picket fence and the house, and you're going to have the family and the kids and everything. And I think that part of getting the diagnosis for me and unmasking and all of the emotional journey that comes with it was so much grief on who I thought I was going to be, who I thought I should be, and who I actually turned out to be and who I was in that moment. And those worlds didn't have much crossover, right? And so there's a lot of grief, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of resentment. Yeah, there's a lot of emotion, like an array of emotions that come around until I finally really did the work on myself to go, who do I want to become now that I know this? And how do I work with myself to achieve what it is I want now?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to ask you about your book in a minute, but I wanted to ask you this because I'm personally curious. You said you've been with your husband now for over 20 years, and gay rights have all gone under an extreme makeover, just like DE&I rights have for people with disabilities and neurodivergent people. So I'm curious to ask you about what do you think it means to be an effective advocate in today's modern society for gay rights? What has your partnership with your husband taught you about unity? I'm curious to get your answer there.
Yeah, my husband is from Venezuela, so we're a gay couple. We're also in an interracial relationship. We have two adopted boys who are have Mexican American heritage, and so there's a lot of intersections of identity that I carry. I'm somebody who is hard of hearing, and so I wear hearing aids, which most people don't notice. So there's a lot of identities that I carry with me, you know, the ADHD, the autism. And I think all of it in combination has really allowed me to be just a human being. And I go back to that core principle is that I can be a human being and sit across from another human being and just go, okay, your experience is valid. I may never understand what your experience is actually like, but I think your experience is your perspective and your experience and your understanding of the world is absolutely valid. And I can get curious and ask questions, or I can, yeah, I what I think a lot of it has to do is I can see a behavior that I don't necessarily care for, and then realize this is a human being reacting in a way of their own lived experience from their own perspective, even when I disagree, right? Like politics are polarizing more and more and more. You know, gay rights are being taken away in many states, or like, um, uh, especially for trans individuals. I think that while I don't agree with any of it, I can understand and put my put on their shoes for a moment and get where they're coming from, even when I don't agree. And so it has really allowed me to be more empathetic to those I don't agree with, I think.
Yeah, and just because I'm interested in building on what you just said, I'm curious how you're redefining the definition of both hope and prosperity based on the society that we're living in today and sort of the societal hurdles that you have to overcome based on the lifestyle you live. So how are you redefining both hope and prosperity, my friend?
Oh, that's a deep question, right? How do I redefine hope and prosperity? I think that prosperity to me is just being comfortable and accepting of what I have in any given moment, right? So it's not about getting more money or wealth. It's just about like I can be prosperous in my life without the monetary. Like I'm uh, uh, very happy with the fact that I've got a husband of now 20 years this month. I've got amazing children. You know, I've lost my mother very early in life. And so, like, I can still be really hopeful and feel prosperous in how I've lived my life up to this point. Um, so yeah, I think that that's what it's for me is like I can just live in the moment of what I have and not have to think about what I don't have.
Yeah, absolutely. And tell me about the book, buddy, rewriting the rules, bud. What do you want people to know about the book behind you and
Yeah.
what they're going to get if they pick it up? My friend, tell me more.
Yeah, the book is really about thinking about our workplaces. So it came from my experience being a neurodivergent person, working in veterinary medicine, although I don't think it has to do much with veterinary medicine. It's business agnostic. I look at the way we build our workplaces very similar to the trolley scenario, if you're familiar. So the
Mm-hmm.
trolley scenario says that there's a trolley raging down the tracks, and there's five people tied up on the main track, right? And you alone have the power to hit the lever and allow the trolley to go to the side track. The dilemma is that there's one person tied up on the side track, right? So what do you do? And it's very much meant to be a no-win situation. It's an ethical dilemma. And I think we very much parallel that to our workplaces where we have we have two systems, right? We can build for the many or build for the few. And I think and not in a bad way, but we built for the many. So now we have workplaces that are when you are one of the few, you have to ask for an accommodation, right? Which not only for a neurodivergent person is shameful to admit that you are struggling, but then you have to make sure that you have a diagnosis, which you may not have. So now you got to go to a doctor, admit your struggles to a doctor, go through testing, go through all of this time and money that you may not have while you're still struggling in the workplace. And then hopefully you get your diagnosis, you bring it back to your employer and say, hey, I'm struggling. Here's my diagnosis, and here's what I need, if you even know what you need. And then if you do know what you need, getting that employer to say, okay, let me look into this and see if I can make that accommodation. Like now I've got to rely on an employer to decide my fate within the company, right? And that's a really shameful, awful process that I think that we have to go through. And so I want us to really take what our workplaces are and reflect. So the system I've created in the book of Rewriting the Rules is RISE. So it's reflection, implementation, sustainability, and empowerment. I want us to reflect on our workplaces, how we build our buildings, what our workflows are, what our policies and procedures are, what our handbook says, and really determine who's included and who's not, right? And we start looking at who's been fired, who's been promoted, looking at the patterns of our workplace from all of the systems, and realize that we probably have created unintentional biases and discriminatory practices in our business. And I say unintentional because I don't think they were meant to be. I don't think that we understood neurodiversity. I don't think we understand a lot of diversity when it comes to the workplace. And so we just rely on people coming to us and saying, hey, I need this fixed, and then determining if that's going to get fixed. But once we know better, I think we can do better, right? If we understand that neurodiversity exists in the workplace and people are struggling, why not start preemptively creating accessibility and implementing new systems? And then systems that create sustainability for the long run, not just one-offs for one person like an accommodation, and hopefully empower the next generation to continue to evolve as human beings evolve. Our understanding of human beings, our understanding of neurodiversity, our understanding of language and how it's used in the everyday workplace, it has evolved just in the 20 years the 24 years I've been in leadership in veterinary medicine. So should our workplaces. Those should have evolved with our understanding of human beings and language and whatnot. And so why shouldn't the workplace? And that's really what the book is about, is let's evolve with the workplace, because when we create neuro inclusion in the practices or in our workplaces, we are everyone in the business benefits.
Yeah. And just because I'm curious again, I wanted to follow up on that by asking you about if you had a message to employers, because I talk to employers about the need to diversify their workforces and think differently, and really view inclusion in the workforce as a competitive advantage. How do you think employers have to rethink the hiring, the recruiting, and the onboarding, and ultimately the integrating of people with different perspectives into the workforce? Because it's one thing to put on the end of a job application that we're a diverse, accepting employer or an equal opportunity employer, but it's another thing to put it in practice. So how do you think employers need to rethink the hiring, the recruiting, and the onboarding process, my friend?
Yeah, in the neurodivergent world, I think we have to understand human differences, right? So if I've got somebody who doesn't make the expected eye contact in an interview, that may not be a bad thing, right? Like, does eye contact actually matter in the grand scheme of the business? Probably not. I see it all the time in veterinary medicine where they'll say, well, they need to be able to make eye contact with our clients. And I said, well, what's the point of making eye contact, right? So you dig down into the question. And if your point of eye contact is good customer service, it's the question becomes no, like not eye contact. Can this person actually provide good customer experience and service? Not can they make eye contact, right? So we've got to understand that there are neurological differences. There are the way our brain's processes are different. And so if we have that in mind, we shouldn't be judging someone whether or not they can make eye contact, whether or not they have a learning difference of something that needs to be video versus read, right? Like if I process auditorily instead of reading, that shouldn't be a problem. There's understanding that there are variations in how we learn, variations in how we process, and I think gone are the days of gatekeeping what questions that we ask in the hiring process. Like, can we give out the questions ahead of time, allow people to process the information? How do we actually work in the business? Because I'll tell you, in veterinary medicine specifically, which is my background, if I have a question I don't know how to answer in an exam room with a client, I'm not going to just pretend and make it up. I'm going to go, you know what, let me look into that, right? And take some time to really answer that question. The same thing should happen in our hiring process. We can't expect people to know everything and have a polished answer all the time, because look what happens. We get someone who says the polished answer, and then we get them into the workplace and we're surprised that they're not the person who we actually interviewed, right? There's a difference between the behavior and what was said was the thing. Allow people to process the information beforehand. So I think there's a whole, I can go on and on and on about the hiring process and onboarding process and how we can make it more neuro-inclusive. But I do think that we've got to start looking at the fact that we do have neurodivergent people in the world, and some of the behaviors and traits that are displayed are not bad or wrong. They're just different than what we were told what professional looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ronald, my final question for you, my friend, has to do with your own personal and professional legacy and how you want that to be defined.
I think this may be cliche to say, but I would like to leave the workforce better than when I arrived in it. When I arrived in it, like the professional or the leader needed to be cool, calm, and collected, and never looked at as being vulnerable or having a bad day. I think if I can make an impact on neuro inclusion in the workplace, more accessibility, and having vulnerability built in, like the human centeredness and the human variation built into the workplace, that would be the legacy I'd want to leave behind.
Absolutely, my friend. And finally, tell me if people want to get connected with you, my friend, what's the best way they can do that?
Yeah, there's two great ways. My social media of choice is mostly LinkedIn, so you can find me there as Ron Sosa. And then my website is a great place that you can book a call with me if you're interested in talking about neuro inclusion, wanting to understand more about coaching. That's Syn-APT, SYN-APT.me. And you can find me there and book a call with me.
Fabulous. Well, my friend, I hope you had just as much fun as I did talking about neurodiversity, inclusion, and acceptance during our time together. I thought this was a thought-provoking and engaging conversation. And I want to thank you for engaging in conversation with me in the work that you do in the neuro-inclusive space and for being here this afternoon. It's most appreciated.
I really appreciate you having me on. I love the messaging that you have, and thank you for having me here.